Well, good afternoon, everyone. What if you could find from the Scripture somewhere that you can define as a place that God would begin His next step to biblical fulfillment? Wouldn't it be incredible? Well, I want to talk about something today. The name of the sermon is The Next Great Step to Biblical Fulfillment. Now, I thought about that title as I wandered and I pondered it in my mind. How can I make a statement like that, and how would we know? So I decided to let you make a decision on your own. So there you have a question mark. Are we in a time where we have just witnessed the beginning of the next great step to biblical fulfillment? How would you know? As you go back through Scripture and you try to find places that God began His movement, it's very hard to define that. A few weeks ago when I gave a sermon, we were talking about the displacement of God from our society. Where did it begin? Well, I went back and I began to lay it out as best I could understand way back into the mid-20s, if you remember, when we began to see the monkey trials, as they labeled it back then, when America allowed to be brought in evolution to compete against creationism and being allowed to be taught to our children. If someone back then would say, well, listen, if we allow this step, quiet, remote, unassuming, to come into our system, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to be rejecting God from our society. They would have laughed you to scorn, wouldn't they? So no, that's not going to happen. We're just teaching another principle of what could have possibly happened. A person doesn't just go from someone who shoplifts in a grocery store to be a hardened murderer, to be a suicide bomber, to be a killer overnight. Things happen little by little. When you talk about the steps, they start very small. Now, I want to talk about something today, and I want to go through this, and I'm going to go get back into the Scripture and lead up to, are we at the time of the next great step to biblical fulfillment? Now, let's go through this, and let's see what the Scriptures have to say. In the prophecy, it does not come about by accident. God's hand divinely guides what He wants done. Now, I thought about this also. People say, well, if God's hand is guiding and directing everything, then we have no freedom of thought. It's going to be done the way He says, and that's it. No, you can't change anything. It's predestined. It's going to happen that way. The interesting thing was, when I went through the Scriptures, what I see is what God brings about is circumstances that allow human beings to make decisions, to make choices. For example, back in the 30s, right after the monkey trials, as I call them, we saw the Wall Street rise to such exuberance, and everybody, it was millionaires everywhere, they said. And then we seen the stock market crash, didn't we? And then we seen the United States go into the Great Depression. Now, the decisions that were made from that time were made upon expediency of the moment. The laws that Roosevelt put into place then was illegal. That's history. I'm not saying something that you probably don't know already. It took actually 10 years for those laws to come in place. They took one step. Policy changed. The policy change was that a taxpayer that you paid, the government could not take your money and give it to someone else. But because there was a need, the government didn't have the money. They couldn't run an unbalanced budget. They had to balance their budgets. They took taxpayer money, used it to develop systems, the roads, the bridges, and all the other things that they go into, started heading off food and money. So they took taxes from one individual and gave them to another. That was against the law. The Supreme Court came in and said, no, you can't do that. And it would be overturned. During the course of 10 years, one law would be in place, another one would be overturned. During that time, the Supreme Court justices gradually changed to where there are enough judges on the courts to be able to change the law. Had the United States not done that, I look at that as a great step to biblical fulfillment. Why? Because the policy changed that almost 60, 70 years, 80 years down the road, we're witnessing the results of a policy change that went contrary to God's law. Do you understand where I'm coming from? Now, Roosevelt is classified as a hero, and he got him through the Great Depression and the policy changes. The problem is, if we make decisions that are contrary to God's law, somewhere down the course of time, you will pay a price. The taxpayers today are paying a horrendous price that they could never have imagined when it seemed like it was the right thing to do. You follow where I'm coming from? We're talking about policy, how it changed the future of America from the 30s to today, where the government can actually come in and take, against taxpayer will, $800 billion, $700 billion, buy out companies, and just give out the money, and now they don't know where it went. $350 billion just dry up and say, where is all that money? And now everybody's mad at everybody else, trying to figure out what's going on. Prophecy is divinely guided. Prophecy sometimes takes thousands of years to come to pass. God raises up, God removes nations, kings, and presidents. He will put the policy in for what he needs to come about, and then it's up to individuals whether they will stand by the truth or not. At every turn, at every single turn throughout history, where God was about to begin a prophetic movement, Satan was there attempting to stop God's plan. Now, this is a sub-theme. I want to bring this out, and I want you to keep this in your mind throughout this entire sermon. At every point that God's plan is in place, Satan is there. We must never forget that. This nation does not believe that simple. If I stopped right now, my sermon would be finished, and I would be satisfied with the point of saying, listen, if you remember this, that no matter what you do, Satan is there to try to stop you, if you're trying to do God's will. If there was one way to get that across to America, but see, America doesn't want to believe that. They believe they have taken God and separated him now. He's out in this little box, and we will call upon him when we need him, and we will deal with our nation now without God. That's what our nation has done. That could not have happened had we not allowed the very first step back in the 20s by allowing an evolutionary process to come in. Do we understand that? It's very simple. And you don't realize that each one of these steps takes place. Satan's fury. Now, this is how Satan works. Satan doesn't change. Satan works, this is as simple as I can grasp it. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. There he is. He's there before God. And we can go on and say, and the Lord said to Satan, where do you come from? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down in it. Satan spends his time doing what? Going to and fro to do what? 1 Peter 5:8 tells us exactly what he does. We have the warning, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about, and every time you go before God, and your prayers are before God, please understand, Satan will be there trying to destroy you. He has one goal in life, to destroy God's plan. As a roaring lion walking about seeking whom he may devour.